So, Dominic, we talked earlier about the preliminary principles, the guiding principles of the Book of Church Order. Now, you've been, if I could put it this way, in this game a long time. Where do you see most often problems arise from people not knowing, understanding, or applying the Book of Church Order?
I jump always to BCO 3-2, and the reason for it is that delineates very clearly that there are two powers that church courts have. The church courts are sessions, presbytery, and general assembly. And what it says is there's two powers. The power of order, which is more like preaching, shepherding, pastoring, caring for the flock.
So when you talk about a court, you mean more than just men sitting as judges with gavels and wigs on.
Exactly. And that's a good point, because that's the way our Book of Church Order refers to those assemblies that way. But we should see them as corporate pastors, because we do believe in the plurality of elders, don't we?
That's right. They're not just judges, they're shepherds too.
Absolutely. So in this, they're shepherding. And so most of ministry is in that shepherding area. In a prior film, we talked about the importance of discipline. And we said discipline is discipling.
Right.
And that's teaching, encouraging, showing the ropes, knowing how to function. So it's not just sit in the corner and time out.
And the more committed we are to that, the less likely we are to have actual disciplinary cases and trials.
Which is the second point, which is the power of jurisdiction. And the authority of jurisdiction is judicial. Now, the shepherding, I'll use the shorthand now, shepherding or pastoring, and judicial are two of the powers that we need to make sure remain separate even with the same group.
Now, why would you want to be separate? Wouldn't you want to be pastoral as you're involved in the judicial process?
Yes, we are. It's just that one has a different object, a different end, or a different goal. So if you're a member of my church and you're struggling with something, then I want you to come to visit with me as your pastor, and I want to sit down and I said, Fred, I really care about you and love you, and you really need to shape up here, but let me walk you through some steps. And if you're paying attention, then I can give you a hug, I can shake your hand, I can encourage you and say, attaboy. Or if you're sort of being stubborn, I can say, now look here, and I can put my finger in, because as a shepherd, I care about you.
Right.
Okay, and so that's the way it is, and I'm thinking that you as a pastor would have the same thing. So there's a time when you give a hug, and there's a time when you give a finger wagging, because you're trying to encourage, motivate, and move someone to a different direction. So that's the power of order, and the BCO 3-2 makes that point. Now the second is judicial. When you get there, now you're be a little more formal. Now you have a level playing field. And you have, like a football field, a goalpost on both ends of the field, buried 20 feet into the ground in cement.
Now, why is it important to be formal? Isn't informality more spiritual?
No, it isn't, because not by itself, it isn't. It's not either or. If you care, you're going to go through this process. Why even spend the time being formal or in judicial? One is you're giving that other person the rights. You're not just going to assume anything. The member has a right to defend himself or herself, and not just because I say so or the group of elders say so, oh, you're bad, and then we immediately judge you. No, we're not going to do that. You have rights to defend yourself, and we give you the right just as you would have in a secular court situation.
Right, because our confession says, and the Bible teaches, that even church courts can make errors.
Yes.
And so we don't just assume what the accusation is true. It's curious. I've had conversations and difficulties especially with sessions, in which they will say, well, we had to discipline this person. Well, how did you do that? Oh, well, we wrote them a letter. We met as a session, and we wrote them a letter, and we told them that they were barred from the Lord's table for a period of time.
Oh, no, they can't do that.
No, my response is, when did you hold the trial?
Yeah, that's right.
Did you cite them? You can't just do these things unilaterally.
No, that's right, because you made a judgment without finding any real guilt. You just assumed that the person was acting out of sorts. Well, and they probably were, but you need, if they're not going to correct on the basis of counsel. By the way, and we're long suffering with him for a period of time. It's not something that, okay, you don't listen to his advice right now. then we're going to come after you. No, it's long suffering. The shepherd cares for the sheep. You know, if the sheep goes astray, he goes and leaves the 99, goes finds the one, and pulls them out of the briar bush.
So you're saying we should actually follow the Bible as we're trying to discipline and disciple
there
people.
You go, meddling
that we should go after the one when we have the 99. That we should apply the principle from Proverbs that the first to present his case seems right until there's a response.
Exactly. You come and question them. So that's where we expend our time, and to sort of jokingly say, that's why they pay us the big bucks. Actually, they pay us the little bucks, but it's if we really care about our people, we'll be long suffering with them, and we'll labor with them, because some issues that they face may be so deep and personal that it takes a while to get them out. Now, if there seems to be a rebellious spirit, an arrogance, a willfulness, then we can think about moving towards more of a formal process. But we don't go there right away, and we don't immediately just throw out this thing. I hear this all the time. Well, we just need to file charges against them. Right. Well, you don't start there. You start with this long-suffering pastoral shepherding ministry.
But even if you have to come to the point of filing charges, it's important to do this in the right way.
Absolutely.
Because if someone doesn't feel like they're heard, if someone feels like they've been railroaded, that they don't have any rights, then they're less likely to respond in repentance, either in the process or even years later. But someone who has to be disciplined because they won't give up a sin, if years later they realize that we were patient with them, we were long-suffering with them, we let them tell their story, we let them bring their evidence, they're much more likely to respond in a positive way to that discipline. And that's what discipline is all about, right?
Yeah, we mentioned it before. It's the desire to restore the person who has gone astray. And we always want to work towards restoration. That's what Jesus worked towards, and that's what we need to. And that's the end both of the shepherding power as well as the judicial power. The problem that comes up, and you and I have talked offline on this, is that because church courts aren't aware of the distinction, they try and mix shepherding and judicial, and the two are oil and water with reference to the way they each have their own rules, and therefore you can't put the two together. If you're feeling like the shepherding's not working, and you move over here, now you have to move to concrete evidence. It's not how you feel. You've got to be Joe Friday, just the facts, ma'am, just the fact.
I mean, if I've seen it once, I've seen it 100 times. You go to judicial process, our court goes to judicial process, and they try to be pastoral. And in doing that, they deny the accused his or her rights.
Right.
You know, what we end up doing is we have a judicial process, for example, you've seen this many times, where the court will write a letter to the person and say, we think pastorally you need to do 1, 2, 3, 4. Usually naming and convicting someone of sins without even hearing them.
Exactly.
And they think they're being pastoral, but what they've done is been judge and jury without even hearing the case.
Exactly. And they've acted, like you said, with that, removing them from, or suspending them from the Lord's table, let's say. Well, you go to BCO chapter 30, which is the chapter on censures, and you find that no censure can be inflicted or put on a member without there having been a finding of guilt. Either the person comes as his own confessor and therefore is guilty and says, okay, I'm guilty, and there's a censure, or there's a trial and a finding of guilt. And then, and only then, can you go through the various steps that are in chapter 30.
That's right, and this is just simply applying biblical principles. It goes all the way back to the Pentateuch, to the first 5 books of the Bible, to the days of Moses, in which you don't convict someone of something without 2 witnesses, without evidence. Yeah. And so all of our rules, which can get complicated.
That's right.
All of those rules are in there to make sure that those biblical principles are upheld.
And, you know, when you mentioned the Old Testament in some of the steps that were there, if somebody was accused of killing someone, each tribe had a city of refuge. And what was the city of refuge for? Is so the person said, I didn't do it, but everything looks like I did. So he runs to the city of refuge, and while he's there, he's protected. Meanwhile, they're gathering the evidence to say, we believe that we have enough to charge this man, and then the city of refuge elders will release him to be dealt with under the rules. See, but meanwhile, you don't get a hot-headed revenge. The kinsman redeemer, as the Bible says, doesn't say who has the right to avenge the death. No, you have protection. So we have to have that sense of protection so that when the facts come out. Now, let me just, this is important here, that when we get to that point, and this is where I see probably have dealt more problems. Maybe this is up there, maybe one or two in the top problems I've seen. One is that the court says that they need to do an investigation. And when they do, that means they're looking for the evidence that points to a strong presumption of guilt.
You're referring to our Book of Church Order 31-2,
yes.
If someone wants to look at that language exactly.
Absolutely. Go to 31-2. Absolutely critical. Now, just real quick, what is a strong presumption of guilt? A strong presumption of guilt is that the evidence that you, as a court and under investigation, have gathered together, and you evaluate it and you say that this is so strong that the presumption of guilt is there, so that if we go to trial, there's a high probability of securing a guilty verdict. Now, you do an investigation, and maybe there isn't that strong evidence. Then what do? You dismiss.
That's right. But even if there is, it's just a presumption of guilt.
Yes, right.
It's not guilt itself, because the accused may not even have given their evidence or told their side of the story. As a matter of fact, under BCO 31-2, someone who's accused or has reports about their character doesn't have to participate in this investigation.
Absolutely.
It's not a trial.
Yeah.
I talk about it as being akin to a grand jury investigation. And so it's, will we proceed to process?
The grand jury assessment is analogy is absolutely correct. That is there evidence? That's the point you're going to look at, because when you go to trial, you have to have the concreteness of evidence to be able to put things together. So you do need at least two witnesses to confirm and corroborate a particular matter.
Now, something that I've seen with respect to this is that there's confusion about actually what an investigation is involved with. This will happen a lot in the local church. So if someone's concerned about a family, the pastor will go over and visit with the family, talk to the husband, talk to the wife, maybe talk to some friends of theirs, etc., try to deal pastorally with the issue. Now, that's not an investigation. That's not a capital I, we might call it, 31-2 investigation, is it?
No, it isn't. No, you need more data than that, because especially if it only happened in a conversation between two people, what we would claim, especially if it's husband and wife, behind closed doors. You'd have to have someone else who would be able to corroborate that took place.
And so if I'm a ruling elder in a church and I want to get to the bottom of something in a formal way, what I would need to do is, in the next session meeting I'm at, I would need to make a motion that says, I move that we as a court form an investigation under BCO 31-2 of Mr. Smith and the reports of his infidelity. And then that's formal, it's on the minutes, and then we can proceed with a formal investigation and decide whether Mr. Smith is vindicated, there's nothing to this report, or whether we need to actually proceed to process, right?
Absolutely. In fact, I remember one time I received a phone call where a presbytery was doing this with an allegation that was made against a minister. And so as they were saying, how do we go about this? We want to make sure we're doing it right. And this very thing happened. There was the accusation that there was infidelity. And so the question was, who could know about it? Can you have two witnesses? And two witnesses can be, by the way, one person and something corroborates. So
a document,
a tape,
right,
or something, and they didn't have it. And so I said, if you've really done the research and you've done your investigation, and down deep in your heart of hearts you believe it, but you can't prove it by evidence because he's not going to speak to that, then you have to dismiss.
Now let me ask you another question about BCO 31-2. It applies mostly in presbyteries, not in local churches. Some folks believe that you must do an investigation before you can have any kind of judicial process. Is that true?
No. There's another thing that if you go to another BCO provision, BCO 32-2, where it says that if somebody acts as on his own personal way, following Matthew 18, he will approach the individual. Matthew 18 gives those 3 steps. You approach the person first that you believe has sinned, and you confront him with their sin. If he doesn't respond and repent, then you go with 2 or 3 witnesses. And if he doesn't respond, then at that point, you tell it to the church.
Right.
And that means that you can actually draft the charges.
And tell it to the church doesn't mean stand up in the worship service and yell it out, right?
No. In the Presbyterian system, it means that you take it to the appropriate body. So if it's in the local church,
A group of elders.
it's be the session, and then the presbytery would be the session. The presbytery itself, usually the shepherding committee to start with, or something like that. Or if it might have a judicial committee. But yeah, the telling of the church means I cannot process that. I can't prosecute this. Only the court can. So our book says if that's the way you get to it, by someone after drafting the charges, producing the specification, that is how, the who, what, where, and how. You have to have that to show that it has concreteness, not
Right.
just a charge. Then you bring it to the church, and the church then, on the basis of that, will say, in the name of the Presbyterian Church in America, we file these charges.
And I think this is where the benefit of the Book of Church Order can be found, because almost all the provisions in the Book of Church Order are either there to prevent a problem or because there was a problem and we address it. So one problem that might come up is someone might say, well, if someone comes up to me via Matthew 18 and files charges against me, they got it in for me. They're always after me. They're just making this stuff up. In our Book of Church Order, there are provisions that prevent someone who's litigious, who's constantly coming after someone, right?
Absolutely. It says that, in fact, you shouldn't be loath to receive or careful to receive information from someone who is known to be litigious or have a malicious intent, and it's been demonstrated by some other record that the court is aware of. And so you take that with the old say, the grain of salt. You have to, you've got to be careful. And also, people throw the word charges around, the same thing. Well, I don't like that. I'm going to charge you with that. And then I stand up and I always ask the question, where's the evidence? What have you done judicially to get, or the grand jury, in order to say that there's something wrong? You think
That's right.
that has happened. That isn't what makes something chargeable.
One of the best statements on this, a good friend of mine uses all the time. He says, call your first witness.
Yes.
And that reminds someone that you actually have to have witnesses. Yeah. And you actually have to have evidence. You can't just be angry with someone and seek to use the church to further your anger.
And that's it. What I call weaponizing judicial process for personal affronts and broken down relationships.
And we need to be careful that we're using judicial process in a proper way, because it's something established by Jesus. And one of the other things that our book says is that if I make false accusations against you, I can be subject to censure just by making those false accusations.
And our book,
it can turn back up on me.
That's right, and our book says that. In other words, you need to be careful what you are charging with, because you fall prey to then violating the 9th commandment, because you've now disseminated and spoken things that are not true. You have borne false witness.
So if I'm an elder, I need to understand that I have 2 roles. I'm a judge, but I'm also a pastor. I'm a shepherd. And those roles can be intertwined in the sense that one can lead to another, but I need to keep them separate and distinct. I can't always be a judge and go around with a gavel to hit people on the head all the time. I can't try to always be a pastor and never call people to account, right?
Right.
This is what I'm called to, whether I've been to seminary or not, whether I've been to Bible school or not. This is a calling from Jesus Christ.
And you're right, and it comes back again to this, that we can't say, I tried and tried and tried, and now I'm offended that this member hasn't listened to me, and so I'm going to move over to the judicial process. Because at that point, you still may not have the evidence. Okay? So you have to sort of watch your own personal life and your response to those kinds of things. So that's where being a shepherd Really, it's that long suffering. You desire. You spend a lot of time praying for that person, weeping over that person, caring, and you want the best for them. But it may never ever get to judicial process because it's something that is at that personal and shepherding level that doesn't have a judicial side to it. If it has a judicial side, then you can move there after you've exhausted the other side.
And of course, we could go to multiple places in the Bible to apply this. Matthew 18, Galatians 6, 1 Peter, love covers a multitude of sins. And really all the BCO does is it gives us kind of practical how-to steps to apply those biblical principles, right?
And that's the reason I come back to a phrase I just used a moment ago, that our tendency is at times to get upset, to have our noses put out of joint, and then we weaponize judicial process as a way of sort of assuaging myself and getting satisfaction, getting my pound of flesh. And that is not the reason. That is a misuse of judicial process. It's only to get to the truth and to the hope of honoring Christ, the purity of the church, and to reclaim that sinner.
And of course, one final word on this, that if we don't follow the book of church order, if we think we know better, or if we try to take shortcuts, those shortcuts, before we had GPS, you take the shortcuts on your route and you add 10 hours to your trip.
Yeah.
That's what you'll do. Because if you don't follow this process, all you usually do is give yourself more grief and more trouble. You wind up with more ecclesiastical litigation, more fighting, more anger, and you really aren't saving yourself any time at all.
I would suggest, in light of what you just said, that everyone who's listening to this recording will save themselves a great deal of time by calling somebody who knows what they're doing, a third party who doesn't have a
before they do something.
Before they do something.
Not after.
Absolutely.
It's always easier to stop the mess than clean it up.
That's right. And get that guidance ahead of time. And sometimes they'll get guidance you don't want to hear because you're, like this. But the person says, you don't have anything there. And this dog won't hunt. Okay. Right. So, yes. So you would save yourself a great deal of grief. And the church a great deal of grief. Just sometimes you say, I need to let it go. But if I do have it, let's move it in the right direction. Because in another session, we're going to talk about complaints and appeals, and we'll talk that only adds more.
That's right.
And boy, does that add some more to the whole thing. So we'll get to that another time.
That's right.